What up, comrades? So, I don't even know what arc we're on. I think we're still kind of on the third foundation or third. What was it called? Whatever. The big bad guy group that like they keep hinting at since all the way back with Banshee. Which is only a few episodes. It's only a few issues ago. Man, Stan Lee really fucking like to write these fucking comics like a book with pictures. It takes so long to get through one of these books. Anyway, so now we're up against the Warlock. So who's the Warlock? The Warlock is Merlin the Magician. The Merlin the Magician that you're thinking about. He's also one of Thor's like preeminent villains. I can't remember. I never read that much Thor. I read some Avengers. I think he still calls himself the Warlock when he fights Thor for the most part, from what I recall. I don't remember Merlin. I remember this story vaguely. Like the Warlock recounts the story of how he came to be and how Thor beat him originally. And I like vaguely remember that also being recounted in some Avengers comic book I read like decades ago. Because I was like, oh, this sounds super familiar. I've also read this comic at some point, like 20 years ago, so it might have been in there. So the Warlock has a lot of just bullshit powers, right? He can like do bullshit stuff. Like his mind is super powerful, so he's able to like block Professor X and then shut off Professor X's powers, and he's able to draw all the mutants into like a negative realm, so he can transport them to where he's at, because he's trying to get Jean Grey as like his queen, and then he's able to like mindfuck Jean Grey, and so that she's like going along willingly, quote unquote. And Angel's able to like grasp onto her hand as they're traveling through like the negative dimension, so he comes out too. And then the Warlock shows them like his castle thingy that he's built, where he's got knights essentially, but they all got like machine guns and crap. And one of them's like, "Hey, should I kill these guys?" And the Warlock's, "No, they humor me. Ha 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 ha. He'll regret that decision later. Don't worry." And so Angel and Professor X are like kind of mind talking, and he's like, Warlock thinks he has a lot more control over my mind than he really does, so but shh, be quiet. And then at some point Angel gets really mad because Warlock's getting the Warlock, not Warlock the future X-Men, the Warlock here, Merlin, is getting posy with Jean Grey, and he's like, no more of that. And then the Warlock like lights his wings on fire, and Professor X is like, go jump in the river over there. And he's like, Professor X knew there was a river here, he must be getting more of his powers. And they have like a brief conversation about that. And then Warlock and Jean Grey are standing around. He's like, and Jean Grey is like, oh no, something happened to Professor X. I sense it. And Warlock's, you wait here. He goes back. Professor X is like laying on the ground, and Angel's like holding him up. He's like, oh, he just fell out of his thing. And then the other X-Men sneakily like show up. They pop out of nowhere because they got pulled out of the negative realm by Professor X, and they're like, aha! And then Warlock like glues their feet to the ground and takes Professor X, and they have like a conversation about what Warlock wants to do. And this is where he tells like the story about Thor and all that. So the X-Men are having none of that. So then they have to go fight in like the gladiator arenas, which it takes them to like this arena, but there's like not any real fighting going on, because the X-Men like push back against the Warlock even more, and they're able to like hop up on top of the arena. And then the Warlock starts running away because Professor X is getting more and more of his power back, so he's able to like dampen the Warlock's power, and they chase him, and Cyclops is able to blast through like a portcullis because of the power of his love for Jean Grey that he doesn't tell anyone about. What a nerd. And then the Professor X has like recovered all his powers, so he's able to go toe to toe with the Warlock. And then Jean Grey is, because Warlock's exerting himself so much, is able to like break free and like help the X-Men. And then the Beast covers his eyes so he can't mesmerize anybody anymore. And then Professor X uses like a super mind ball to like knock him back out, so they can put him back in the crypt in like the museum, which is going to keep him contained, which is part of like the original story. And then the Iceman goes and like he does something. He like freezes all the guards before they can shoot anybody, just like off screen. And they're like, the state police will come take care of this. And I'm like, are they in New York still? I guess. Maybe I missed that. And then they're all like, da-da-da-da, we did it. But they're still like the third foundation. What are we going to do about them? Dun, dun, dun. And that's the end of that issue. So the next issue of the X-Men, after the Warlock, is another just kind of random issue. I don't know if I'm going to have an arc to name for any of these, because it's just kind of like some random villain of the week issues. It's not really pushing anything forward. But it's the Cobalt Man! So who's the Cobalt Man? He's an Iron Man villain. Roger, I think. Robert Rogers. I think it's Robert Rogers. Steve Rogers. That's funny. I think it is Robert Rogers. Or Roger Roberts. It's something like that. His brother is Ted. We all know Ted. Ted is the guy at the school who's into Jean Grey, who she hangs out with, but she's not dating because he's totally friend zoned because of Scott Summers. Beat him to the punch. So the issue starts off with the X-Men fucking around in the danger room, and Angel is back to his prime self, I guess, and everyone's like congratulating him for doing a great job on this little like foray they had into the danger room, and he's like, he's all better, all good to go. And then everyone kind of pieces out. Jean's not there because she's in school and she's not really official. She's an official member of the X-Men, but she's like going to school somewhere else. So Cyclops is given some books that they use to fight El Tigre and Quetzalcoatl or whatever it was. And Professor X asks him to go, and Professor X or Scott's like, "Why did the professor choose me over Warren Worthington?" And then Professor X is like, "These dumb bitches, I gotta help these motherfuckers hook up. It's so ridiculous. They just can't figure it out." And then as Scott's leaving, Warren's like, "Hey, I was gonna go check out and say what up to Jeannie. You wanna come?" And he's like, "Yeah, thanks, bro, for the ride and stuff. That's awesome. You're the best." And so they ride out together. And meanwhile, Beast or Hank and Bobby go to meet with Zelda and Vera, I think is her name. And they go back to that place they always go to with the Beat Poet. And the Beat Poet is flirting with Zelda, and Bobby's getting kind of concerned, so he ices his cafe latte or espresso or whatever the fuck he was drinking. Hilarious. So meanwhile, Jeannie's hanging out with Ted, and he's like, "I want you to meet my brother, Ralph Roberts." Starts with an R. I'm just going to go with Ralph for now. That's the name of the brother. And so he shows up, and he's like, "Oh, I used to work for Stark Industries, and I was doing all this stuff, and then I went and started my own." I think Rogers is the last name. No, Roberts. Roberts is the last name, because I think he starts a company called, like, Roberts Robotics, I think. Yeah, so we're just going to go with Ralph. So Ralph is, he's kind of arrogant, but he's also cool, and then him and his brother are super competitive, right? And then Ted has, like, a inferiority complex because his brother's the bestest. So they decide to do some pole vaulting for some reason, and while they're pole vaulting, Ralph hits his head against the beam, and like it's not he has like a TBI. He gets like knocked unconscious, and then he like comes to, and he's like, "Oh man, let's go to my lab now." But first, let's go have a snackaroozy. So they go have a snackaroozy, and while they're there, they bump into Scott and Warren, find them, and they all decide to hang out and chit chat and everything. And Scott's like, "Damn, there's like so much competition for this hot babe." Bruh. Then, but Warren's like, "Nah." They all decide they're going to go to the lab, but Warren's like, "Nah, bitches. I'm going to go do something else." And he stumbles into, I'm trying to remember the wording that Stanley uses. It's like some psychedelic something. It's just like some disco. It's not disco. This is like before disco. It's like one of those, I don't know how to describe it. It's just like a club, essentially. And while he's in there, he bumps into Candy Southern. Who is Candy Southern? Candy Southern is Warren's kind of like main squeeze periodically for a while. So she comes in and out, and they like are dating, and I think they're engaged at one point. I don't remember exactly. We'll get to that. But she's some hot stuff, and so thank goodness he's gonna be like taking his departure from Jean Grey, so he can be with this babe. And so they chit chat a little bit. And then back at the research place, Jean and Scott are like looking at some stuff, and Ralph is like, "Hey bro, come check out this awesome thing." And he's like, "Check out my Cobalt armor. I built it because Tony Stark's an asshole, and I'm going to show everybody that it's awesome. But if I wear it for more than like 2 hours, I turn into a C-bomb." I don't know what that is. The comic assumes I know what that is. I don't know if it's like A-bomb, B-bomb, C-bomb is the idea there. I'm assuming it's just like a completely made up thing because I've never heard of it. And I've watched Oppenheimer, so I know everything about the atomic bomb stuff. Starring Iron Man as some douchebag salesman. Anyway. And then he puts the armor on to show him, and because his brain's all messed up because he has TBI, because he bashed his head while trying to do some stupid competition with his brother, he like loses it, and he's like, "I need to go fight Iron Man right now," and so he takes off. And then Jean Grey and Cyclops hear all this noise and some destruction going on, so they get their uniforms on and they go and they fight Cobalt Man for a little bit, and then he like crashes a whole bunch of stuff on top of them. So they call out to Professor X, who then calls out to the other X-Men, and they all make their moves to meet up. So Warren excuses himself, tells Candy he's going to call him later so he can get it in. And he hops in his Mustang, and Beast and Bobby, for like the 45th time, as mentioned by Vera and Zelda, bounces out to go do question mark. But they don't have enough money for a cab to get to where they need to go, so they end up like walking, but then Warren picks them up. Meanwhile, Gene and Scott are hiding in the back of a van, like Ted's van. So he gets it and drives to Stark Industries, and so they all meet up there, and they see Cobalt Man, so they start fighting him, and they come up with a plan where they're going to like freeze his, or like Ted tells him about everything that Ralph told him about him blowing up and the power supply and whatnot, like the arc reactor. It's not an arc reactor, it's like a cobalt reactor. I guess C-bomb would be a cobalt bomb. That makes sense. I don't know how the explosive properties of cobalt, but I know cobalt is kind of radioactive. Somewhat. Anyway. So Iceman freezes the reactor, Cyclops shoots it, and then the guy falls into the water, and the water finishes the job of short-circuiting it so he doesn't blow up. And Angel rescues him, and then everyone's like, hooray, we saved him, and he didn't blow up. And he's like, oh, my head, I should have never gotten to that thing. I need to refocus and not be such an asshole and be the Cobalt Man. Which the Cobalt Man shows up, I'm pretty sure Cobalt Man shows up against the X-Men again later, but it's different. It's like an actual robot Cobalt. Anyway. So everyone wins, but Ted makes some comment to Marvel Girl about, he's like, oh, I better get back to my friends, but I'm sure they were having a great time, hinting that he knows the tiny little mask that Jean Grey's wearing over her eyes wasn't enough to fool him, and that he knows what the fuck's going on. So good stuff there. Oh, goodness. So next up, we have the return of Juggernaut. This issue is kind of funny. It's like an anime season, like hot tub episode. For those of you who have followed my work, make this reference. If you watch like 80s, 90s, 2000s anime, there is always like very serious hot tub issue, or like robots talking about existentialism in a standalone complex, or there's like always that episode mid-season where they just like pause everything to go to the beach or to fuck around or to have like philosophical debates that have nothing to do with the story, and they're just like there to like fill space. That is what this issue is for the most part. So it's Bobby's birthday, and his girlfriend Zelda is throwing him a party at the Go-Go Cafe or whatever, and then everyone's there with their girls. So Bobby's got Zelda, Hank's got Vera, Gene and Scott are actually there together, like dancing, and they go for a walk, and they're both thinking about how much they love each other, and I think they love me, da 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 da. And Warren shows up with good old Candy Southern, and he's like, oh, I really like her. I've liked her since I was a child, and I've totally forgot Jean Grey because this love triangle was getting super boring and dumb. And it was. So they're all having a good time, and then the Satan Saints show up, which is like a motorcycle gang, and they're all pissed off that Zelda like blew off their master or their leader who asked her on a date, and she was like, hell no, I got a boyfriend. And they're like, we're so angry. So they spin around, and then the X-Men use their powers like very secretly and just outwit them and defeat them all, and then the police come and arrest them, and they're like high five all around. And then Bobby and Hank take their girls home, and when Bobby's standing outside the quote-unquote flat, never heard anyone here call it a flat, with Zelda, he gives her a little smoochy smooch on the lips, and he's like, hooray, I finally did it, I'm a man. I think he's supposed to be 17 at this point. Good for him. Maybe 18. I really think he started X-Men at 16, and now he's 17, because it's his first birthday, if I recall correctly. And everyone else is like 17, and they're going to start turning 18 and going off to do things. Even though Gene's in college, that was my vague understanding of this whole situation. I could be off. Maybe he's 18 now. I don't know. It's not explained here. Gene, like I said, Gene and Scott go for a little walk in the park. Warren's hanging out with Candy Southern at her place, and then, he takes off from there. Meanwhile, Professor X is finally like, hey, remember that door that was brought up like 5 issues ago that we never talked about ever again, that no one was supposed to go into? Well, I'm going to go back there, and you're going to see what's back there. And it's dun-dun-dun, Juggernaut! And he's unconscious. Oh no, why is he unconscious? Because I put him in a coma, and then I put him in with the authorities, and he just stayed in that coma. And so I thought, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna fuck around with this and see. I'm gonna fuck around and find out. And he fucks around and finds out. So he's trying to excise the cryotech from Juggernaut, his brother, because he's his brother's keeper and whatnot. But while he's doing that with the machine he's created, all of a sudden a third entity shows up, and he's like, oh no, my machine was not made to have a third entity show up to battle. The machine like blows up, and Juggernaut wakes up, and he's like, cool. Brother's dead, mission accomplished there. I'm gonna put my helmet on, and then I'm gonna kill the X-Men when they show up. And then the X-Men, they all show up at the house, and they're like, they all change immediately, and they all arrive separately, because they all get like a bad vibe. And Angel and Beast end up tossing a little bit because it's like pitch black, and they're like, oh, what's going on? And they all eventually head down to the basement where the stairs turn into a slide for some reason. And then Juggernaut's down there, and he's like taunting them from behind a box, and Warren flies in this giant room, I guess, that he can like fly at the boxes for some reason. And Juggernaut pops out, and he's like, aha! And now he's got Juggernaut powers extra. Because not only is he like indestructible and no one can stop him, but he's got like reflecting rays or whatever. I don't know. He not rays. He like has an aura about him that I don't remember him having before. So he dispatches Beast and Iceman first, and then Warren, and then he's charging after Jean and Scott. Scott's like, Jean, get out of here, and I'll protect you. And he uses IB, but Juggernaut's like, man, don't give a fuck. And he eventually gets up to Cyclops, and his Jean's like using her telekinesis to get up the stairs. She's all tuckered out and stuff, so she's having a hard time with that, I guess. Juggernaut knocks Cyclops to the ground, and he hits him so hard that the whole area shakes, and Jean slides down the slide. And then she's like, I'll fight you! And she's like using her powers on him, and then she like passes out. And then Juggernaut's like, aha, and I will kill all of you. And then he hears a voice in his head, and it's dun-da-dun, Factor 3, oh no, that enemy we've been hinting at for like months now, if you read the comics in order when they came out. And the guy's like, I am Factor 3, or I am the head of Factor, I don't know, something about Factor 3. And we wanted you to come join us. And Juggernaut's like, I don't do what anyone tells me. But you know what? I choose, because I want to, come join you guys, because you sound cool and stuff. And like, all right, go back to New York, and there's a jet, and we'll fly over to Europe where our base is. And Juggernaut's like, I don't do anything anyone tells me. All right. I have decided that I'm going to go to this jet and fly to Europe because I want to. And so he like busts up the wall and walks out, and it breaks some pipes, and the place is flooding. And then Beast wakes up, and then everyone else wakes up, and they rescue Professor X and take him upstairs. And they're like, oh no, he's hanging on by a thread, just pure force of will. But he's all messed up real bad and stuff. And they're like, we gotta get together, and we gotta stop the Juggernaut. And that's what they plan on doing in the next issue. So, yeah, there you go. So, the second episode, or second volume, second issue of the X-Men here that is dealing with the return of the Juggernaut. The children, the X-Men. What is going on? Reverse. Okay, that's weird. The second issue of the Juggernaut thingy. Juggernaut is slowly working his way over towards this airfield so that he can get in this plane and fly over to Factor 3. I think it's Factor 3. On the way, he runs into the National Guard for New York, who fires a missile at him, or a rocket, and he just like powers through it, and then he causes a big earthquake. Oh no, they run away, and they're like, thank goodness the army is going to come and help push this guy back. We never see hide or nor hide of the army or the National Guard again. But we flip back to the X-Men, and they're talking about, like, good thing we called the governor and told him that they get the National Guard out there to stop the Juggernaut. And then they start putting everything back together, and they, Jean's like, I'm going to search the professor's mind to see if there's a way for us to stop the Juggernaut or figure out why he's in a coma still. So she puts on this, like, funky device and goes into like his memories, but it's not his memories, it's the memories of the Ancient One. And for those of you who have never seen the Marvel movies, the Ancient One is in fact a man, a bald man, who is white. And he is the teacher of Doctor Strange, just like in the movies. But he's lived for thousands of years or something before he passed on the Sorcerer Supreme and disappeared or died. I don't know. I'm not a big Doctor Strange fan. Not that I'm not a Doctor Strange fan, but I never followed it really. I just have like a vague understanding. So at some point he was meandering up, the Ancient One was meandering about like 1,000 years ago, and down in like Vietnam or in Korea. No, it's in Korea. In Korea, found the temple to Cyrotech, or however you pronounce it, whose ruby is what gives Juggernaut his powers. And when he got there, he found Zaox or something, who was the Guardian, and he fought him and banished him inside the ruby. And then, that's the only information we got. That information is important for later, but right now it's not really. And so they're like, the X-Men are like, we gotta find the Ancient One, so we're gonna use Cerebro. And so they like rebuild the room that got destroyed by Juggernaut, while they're making sure Professor X has like a pulse, and then he's like well enough to like just hang out. Oh, excuse me, I got really yawnsy. And then they end up summoning Doctor Strange, who currently, as he mentions, or as Stan Lee mentions, is on trial at Stonehenge for Sorcerer Supreme stuff. But he's like, you summoned me, what's going on? And then Cyclops gives him the lowdown. He's like, all right, here's the deal. I'm going to send you to Vietnam, to Korea, and then you're going to you're going to find the ruby, and then you're going to say this passphrase I put in your mind, and then you're going to enter the Crimson Realm. And once you're in there, you got 1 hour. And if you're there for longer than an hour, you're going to be there forever. And you have to find the other ruby, like the inside ruby, the other dimensional ruby or whatever. And then all the X-Men are like, I'll go. And then Cyclops is like, no, I'm the deputy leader. I'm going to go. And I'll bring one person with me because you can only take 2 people. And he's like, I'm going to bring Jean. And he's in his head, he's like, I'm not just choosing her because it's the woman I love. So they head off, as in they fade out and show up in Korea. And once they're there, they're climbing up a mountain trying to get to this temple as fast as possible. And they bump into, well, they don't bump into, they see some soldiers. Because this is right around like the Korean War ending, I think, when this came out, or like shortly thereafter. So there's North and South Korea. Oh my goodness. And so they like scare them off because these soldiers are like, oh no, it's the Mountain of Cyrotech. It's cursed. This whole place is cursed. And then Jean does some like shenanigans, and they're like, run away. So they find the emerald or the ruby. They say their thing. They end up inside, and there's Xerox, or whatever his name is. And he's like, I am the Guardian. I will be your doom. And he sends like discs at them, and Jean pushes them back. And then they're about to grab the ruby, and they get captured with like these string things, and then there's a giant face of Xerox, and he's like opening them up to eat them, and then they use like their powers to like kind of fight him back, and then he says something, and Jean's like, wait a second, and then boop, they're back at when they first entered, and they're like, ruh-roh, we're running out of time, we gotta figure this out. And it's like, it's like he's stuck in like a time loop, but we're not. So I don't know what to do. But then Jean's like watch is ticking forward in time, because that's how she's keeping track. And Xerox seems very upset by that. So then Cyclops is like, use your watch against him. So then she uses telekinesis to take her watch and like put it on Xerox. And he's like, no! And then he ages like 1,000 years or whatever, and then dies. And Cyclops is like, we're so smart, but we have like 1 minute left, or less than a minute. We got to grab the ruby and go. And so they grab the ruby, and then they're holding hands, and then whoop, they're back in the X Mansion with Professor Xavier. And they're like, all right, he looks good. Let's go. And they get an X-Jet to follow after Angel, Beast, and Iceman. Meanwhile, while this is all, and we're going back and forth in the comics. So meanwhile, while this is going on, the other boys they take the chopper, the X-Chopper, to this military base or to this airfield, and they're like fighting with Juggernaut. There's not a whole lot of that, and it's not that interesting, but that's what they're doing. And they're able to like forestall Juggernaut long enough so that Jean and Cyclops are able to get there with the ruby. Now you may ask, that seems pretty convenient that, they were gone for like an hour or so, and that they were able to catch up, and that, for being unstoppable, he doesn't seem that unstoppable because the other X-Men were able to hold him back for like an hour. But en contraire, or whatever, Stan Lee does. He's a master writer, and he he comments when Jean and Cyclops pop back in, that like 0 time has passed, like very little time has passed. They say like, oh, it's as if we were gone just an instant, and I was like, well, you were gone for like a minute at least, because these guys like took a chop. We're still standing there when you disappeared, so it's not like an immediate instant, but it's not an hour either. So, and they show up, and Cyclops is holding the ruby afloat, and Juggernaut's like, oh, I don't understand. The ruby gives me my powers. Why do I feel so weak? And he's like, give me that. And so he leaps at Cyclops and grabs the ruby, and he's like, ah ha ha, now I will be even more powerful than ever before. But it's like the negative zone ruby, so it actually steals all his powers, and then he starts to like vibrate, and he starts to fade, and then there's like a giant explosion, and everyone's like, oh no, we're gonna die in this giant explosion. But the explosion is just a light show, apparently. So says Cyclops. So they're all okay, and they're like, oh phew, we're fine. And then they're like, all right, cool, that worked out very well. Let's head back to Professor Xavier and try to figure that out. But when they all take the jet back, I guess they just leave the copter for later. And when they get back, Professor X is gone. Dun dun dun. And at some point in the issue, we see Factor 3 like shows up to kidnap him, and then everyone, they mention, and then Cyclops and Angel, or I think it's Jean Grey mentions, like in the future, that it's like, oh no, the Juggernaut was just a diversion. What they really wanted was Professor X. And Factor 3 is like, aha, we got the only man in the whole world that could stop our evil plans. Dun dun dun. And that's the end of that issue. And the second Juggernaut arc, which is going to include the Warlock and the other thing as well. All right, cool. It was good. I enjoy it. This Stanley continues to write way too much for a visual medium, and it continues to be like 6, 7 to 8 panels per page. So I'm like, I don't read everything. I'm not gonna lie. There's a lot of skimming because it's like 20 pages of a book. Like there is so much writing sometimes that I'm just like, all right, what's going on in this picture? Okay, I don't need to read like every like little comment every little person's making. Because a lot of it's just like, oh no, Juggernaut's walking towards us. And I'm like, I see that he's walking towards you. I don't need you to write that out. But, good stuff. All right, catch y'all later.